One I have to make a comment upon, I think, for sure, is the idea of money making a difference. I was asked recently to make a short commentary for the New York Times on that issue, and the metaphor I think I found was that if you spend a lot of money on a gym membership and end up drinking smoothies at the juice bar all day, then no, money doesn't matter. But it depends on what you do with the money. And as I look at one of the charts on page 6, the change in spending fairness ratio, and I look at Louisiana, where I am now, and Louisiana is the highest in the change in most positive in the change in spending fairness ratio. And we have pretty much the lowest scores. And I happen to know that the money that they use, that what happened to that money, a lot of it went to something called the Recovery School District, which anybody who has spent time in education knows that what was done in that Recovery School District was absolutely antithetical to what should have been done to make sure that our children, low-income children of color, learn. And one of the things was parceling out most of New Orleans to charter companies with very little, and the Recovery School District has remained at the bottom of the districts in Louisiana. So, you know, money matters, and how you spend it perhaps matters at least equally. What I wanted to talk about, though, is more specifically about teachers and classrooms. And teacher education. 15 to 20 years ago, I think we heard a lot about cultural relevance, culture, community connection in the education of marginalized low-income students of color. Now, what we're focused much more on is the notion of academic rigor, with the idea of Common Core state standards and some of the programs that, like KIP, for example, that are moving through our inner cities. And I'd say historically you have a very hard time getting both of them together, academic rigor and the notion of cultural relevance, support, community support. Recently, well, a while ago, the Chicago Consortium on Chicago School Research, Valerie Lee et al. Looked at what was it that made schools successful in producing kids who scored high on tests. And they said it was two things: academic press and social support. Academic press is the rigor notion. What we're looking for is academic rigor, high-level thinking, demanding curriculum, again, connected to the much needed, in my view, notions of Common Core. Social support is something else again. It includes knowing your students, connecting the curriculum to the community and to students' interests, creating a sense of safety and belonging, building relationships with students and parents. One example about a sense of safety and belonging, some research that was done by Nilda Flores Gonzalez in 2002 called School Kids, Street Kids. She looked at Latino students and found that those who dropped out, compared those who dropped out in high school to those who stayed in school. And she found that one of the biggest determinants between those two groups was how much they felt they belonged in elementary school, how connected they felt to the teachers, to relationships. And my experience with certainly many other children of color would suggest the same. It also means helping students overcome the societal stereotypes of their intellectual inferiority. And this is, I believe, still an unexplored area in education, and it's even, I think, a taboo area in many instances. If you want to take a look at what this looks like in a high school girl, Kiri Davis, did a little video. It's on YouTube called A Girl Like Me, and others have done it, but it was a re-look at the Kenneth Clark doll studies, where little 3- and 4-year-old black children shown a white doll and a black doll continue now to say, and one of my grad students just redid the study in Louisiana, to say that the white doll is prettier, the white doll is nicer, and the white doll is smarter. The title of my book, Multiplication is for White People, actually came from a quote from a child who said to her tutor, "What you trying to teach me this multiplication for, Miss L? Black people don't multiply. Black people just add and subtract. White people multiply." So there is a lot that's, most times kids don't state it that blatantly. One of the things you will hear them say, however, and a lot of my teachers tell me this, if they're in a poor school, low-income school, or an F school that somebody has designated, then the kids will say to the teacher who is attempting to be academically rigorous, Miss Fontenot, why are you trying to teach us this? This is Baker. In other words, we are not, should not be expected. So that's one of the things that our teachers need to be able to counter as well. So back to the issue of academic press and social support. What the Chicago Consortium found out, that one without the other doesn't do the job. And the difference between having both and not having either at high levels is vast. Looking at some of the reading scores in Chicago, schools that exhibited both academic press and social support in their reading in their reading scores made over 3 times the growth in 1 year than those schools that were weak in both areas. Students in the schools weak in both academic press and social support made half a year's gain in 1 year of instruction. And those in schools that were strong in both academic support, academic press and social support made over a year and a half in growth in 1 year. So that's 3 times the difference. In math, the effect was even more pronounced. The schools exhibiting both academic press and social support made 4 times the growth in 1 year in math achievement than those where the traits were weaker. However, social support without rigor or academic press without social support, both instances showed very little gain. So you can't have an academically rigorous school say we're going to push these kids, and not have the social support. Common Core and the focus on various instructional strategies like no excuses, for example, have continued to create an educational environment for us that's exploding with calls for academic press. We desperately need social support, including cultural relevance of curriculum, building positive relationships with students and parents, and so forth. So my question is, what allows or what contributes to the development of teachers who can produce social support in their classrooms? And I've come up with 3 elements. The first is you can have teachers who come from similar communities as their students or similar backgrounds. Or you can provide time and support for teachers to develop the knowledge about the children in their communities. And the third probably is an and rather than an or. Intensive training to help teachers who may not be sufficiently familiar with their students' communities become knowledgeable enough to create relationships and develop the culturally relevant curricula and culturally responsive teaching styles. And again, this does not mean just a rigorous curriculum, but a deep understanding of the students and their learning styles and the impediments that they might have to learning. So to say again, the academic press without social support makes for very little gain. So my question then is, how are we doing in those three areas? Providing teachers who come from the communities that are similar to their students, hiring teachers who stay in schools long enough to learn about their students in their communities, and three, providing training for teachers to allow them to get a deep understanding of their students and their communities. So on hiring teachers who come from backgrounds similar to their students, we're actually losing ground. Mary Dilworth and Marcus Coleman through the NEA did very recent study, Time for a Change, Diversity in Teaching Revisited. And what they found in short was minority students increased in number and percentage in the U.S. from 1993 to 2008, and minority teachers decreased in number and percentage over the same period. I also say this issue of having teachers who come from similar backgrounds for their students has not been helped by several of new reform efforts in inner city schools. I'll talk about that for a moment, but I want to say, before I do that, just say, since we're looking back and to the present and back, that this is reminiscent of another major reform that began in 1954, which is Brown versus the Board of Education. A bit of history on that. Many of us don't realize that some of the unofficial repercussions of this desegregation decision had some profound effects on who's teaching our children. Prior to the Brown versus Board of Ed decision, black teachers and principals were guaranteed jobs because black teachers and principals were in schools for black children, and white teachers and principals were in schools for white children. Blacks taught blacks and whites taught whites. According to much of the historical research, Vanessa Siddle Walker, for example, and Jim Anderson, there was no question about the prevalence of social support in these settings. Often black educators as well were more highly degreed than their white counterparts, since the segregated school system was one of the few places that highly educated black people could even get a job. When southern states were forced to desegregate, whites were determined to keep as many whites employed as possible. So they had an unexpected opportunity. Undercertified white teachers and principals were moved into the black schools, and the black veteran teachers were discarded. 11 years following Brown, 38,000 black teachers and administrators in 17 southern and border states lost their jobs. 90% of black principals lost their jobs in 11 southern states. All of this created another issue in the 60s and 70s. Many of the white teachers who were at this point less qualified and who had been transferred into the black schools didn't want to be in the black schools, but the state guidelines said that they had to stay there for 3 years. So after 3 years, many of these teachers transferred, creating an ever-changing array of young, white, inexperienced, undercertified teachers in predominantly black schools. There was a cartoon that I added in the book, a revolving school door of white teachers entering and exiting while a group of black kids looked on in bewilderment. This brings us to the current issue contributing to the ever-increasing dearth of teachers of color in city schools. Who are they being replaced with? In many cases, just as in the 1970s cartoon, a long line of minimally certified, undertrained white teachers who will largely leave after 2 or at most 3 years of teaching service. The cartoon would be just as relevant today. History has a way of repeating itself, with black children frequently being the pawns in other people's agendas. Many states have fired or otherwise discarded veteran teachers, especially in New Orleans, after often black teachers, due to so-called budget cuts, only to then hire numbers of, in New Orleans, TFA, Teach for America recruits, to help fill the vacated positions. New Orleans community commentator Lance Hill said instead of Teach for America, it's becoming Bleach for America.
That's good.
Now, I have worked with Teach for America, let me say, teachers, and many of them are absolutely fine, dedicated young people, and who are doing their best and struggling in a situation that is very difficult that they have been put into. And they did so because they wanted to be of help. The problem is not, for me, the young people, but it's a system that's put in place to that displaces veteran teachers and displaces teachers of African descent. Also, with the built-in constant turnover, children who are most in need of stability have to handle people regularly leaving them. I'm not sure what's worse, to have a bad teacher for 2 years who leaves or to have a really good teacher for 2 years who leaves. Both exist in TFA, and the whole leaving issue is, for me, one of the biggest problems. This also creates a problem for the second issue, staying in one place long enough to know the students and get really good at teaching. This is not just a problem for TFA, of course. Many of our young teachers don't stay in urban settings long enough to realize their teaching potential. And this speaks to the need to support those in urban settings who came in with a desire to really expect and want to stay. And finally, the third reason we aren't preparing teachers to provide the necessary social supports to low-income students of color, we aren't helping teachers handle the challenges of providing social support to urban students, because we do not focus their training on what they need to do to be successful specifically in these arenas. So, in order to provide teachers for low-income children of color who know how not only to provide academic prep, but also know how to provide the social supports, I believe we need to invest in teachers who expect to stay around for the long haul. We need to provide support and training. Instead, perhaps, of the $360 million spent last year, $360 million on TFA, investing in planned teacher turnover. Maybe we can use some of that money to put into programs that recruit the best candidates who want to commit to urban settings and train them in creating culturally responsive curricula with rigor. Developing relationships with students and parents, connecting to communities, understanding, and this is a big one because, again, nobody's doing this as far as we're trying to at Southern, understand the linguistic differences that these children bring in and how they may be affecting literacy and affecting how kids are performing on standardized tests. And understanding the lived culture and the cultural heritage of the students that they teach. Jaime Escalante in Stand and Deliver said to the Barrio children who eventually became successful in AP Calculus, you have to learn math. Math is in your blood. The Mayans discovered zero. And so we need to know enough to be able to understand the intellectual heritage of the children of color that we teach as well. And finally, an anthropological orientation to coming into a community and not feeling that you know everything about teaching, but you come in to learn how to learn. So that's the end of to repeat what I wanted to say, what I've said. If we want to provide the best education for low-income students of color, invest in teachers from similar backgrounds, invest in training and a specialized core, to teach and lead in urban settings and in rural settings too, but it's another set of skills. And put money into programs that may be teaching for tenacity, how we can get folk to stay in difficult settings. The end.